All right, hello everyone. We're going to pick up again in just a couple seconds here. So if you were up and around for your lunch break, take a moment, get comfortable, settle in. As a reminder to the audience, and especially if you are just joining us now, by default, your cameras and microphones are off, so you can relax and just enjoy the program today. You can still interact with us, including the planning team, if you need help with tech or with logistics, by using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. You can also use the applaud reaction if you would like to. We'll be monitoring the Q&A and bringing questions from there forward to our speakers when we get to the Q&A part of our talks. We have simultaneous translation available as well. You can choose the language of your preference in the bottom left-hand corner of your screen from the drop-down menu there. So our next session is working in a respectful environment as a temporary foreign worker. And we're going to be digging into some of the working conditions and the unique challenges faced by people who are here on temporary foreign worker permits. And to help us dig into that, we have Christian Jesus Sanabria Vera. Christian immigrated to Canada in 2022 and works as a caseworker for the Madhu Varma Center. He's a Peruvian lawyer trained at the Pontificia Universidad Católica de Peru and holds a master's in political science from the University of New Brunswick. His research is focused on human rights and discrimination suffered by Latin American migrant workers. He's also a member of the Latino community of Fredericton, New Brunswick since 2023. As always, if you have questions for Christian, drop them in the chat and we'll keep an eye on them. Otherwise, Christian, thank you so much for being with us today. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Okay, let's start. I believe everybody can see the presentation. Perfect. So thank you very much for the introduction. My name is Christian Jesus Sanabria Vera, and I come from Lima, Peru. And I'm a caseworker at the Madhu Burma Migrant Justice Center. First of all, I would like to talk about the Madhu Center, that it was founded in 2022 to support workers who were being labor trafficked in Fredericton in New Brunswick. The people that we usually work with do not have a permanent residence status, and they can generally, they are generally not government-sponsored refugees. We can call that their status is one of precarity because they can be asked to leave Canada at any time. We are not a settlement agency. However, we do work really close with those like the Multicultural Association of Fredericton, St. John's Newcomer, MAGMA in Moncton, Multicultural Organization in Miramichi, Ola New Brunswick, among others. These settlement agencies are generally not funded by the government to support those with precarious status, and that is why they refer their cases to the Madhu Burma Migrant Justice Center. Personally, this has been 2 years of a personal great journey working as a caseworker for the center with people with a precarious status. But to understand first, who has precarious status? So first of all, we have people, undocumented people with an overstay visa. This is when you come to Canada with either a tourist visa, a work permit, or a study permit and stay over the length of its validity. And second position, we also have the asylum seekers before they submit their refugee claim. Third, we have the seasonal worker class, and I'm going to focus more on the temporary foreign workers and the seasonal agricultural workers. Number 4, we have the asylum seekers awaiting for their hearing. And finally, we have international students, and I consider them because if by any chance they cannot pay their tuition, they will lose their status as students. As I mentioned before, I'm going to focus this presentation on seasonal workers, especially on the temporary foreign worker. These workers come to Canada with closed work permits, meaning that they can only work for the employer who actually hires them. They are not allowed to change employers. They are not allowed to have a second job. They have precarious status since they can be sent home early when there is a labor shortage. We can say that we need them as a workers, but unfortunately they are disposables as human beings. They often depend on the employer for housing and transportation. There is not a standard, there's not a standard regarding housing conditions here in New Brunswick. Sometimes we have seen workers sharing one house among 10 people with only one bathroom and one kitchen, or 10 workers sharing a house that's considered overcrowded, right? Some people come back from decades without any pathway for permanent residence. Last year during the RACMAT conference in Montreal, I had the pleasure to meet a couple of folks coming from Guatemala that they've been coming here for the past 15 years, and they cannot see any pathway for a permanent residence. We can say that they are permanently temporal. Since the employer has too much power, they can threaten the workers to be sent back to their countries, or not select them again for the next year or next season. We have to acknowledge that these folks rely on their jobs here in Canada to support their families back in their home countries. Most of them are in debt, and they get loans in their countries, and and coming back home without any money, it's not a possibility for them. Also, it's not a possibility for them to not come next year. So that is why these conditions make them endure the abusive situations at the workplace. And many of them come through bilateral agreements between Mexico and the Caribbean, especially from Jamaica and the Dominican Republic. Some are coming from Latin America, Africa, and Asia as well. As we can see, the use of temporary foreign labor is on the rise here in New Brunswick. In 2022, New Brunswick welcomed more than 3,670 foreign workers. This number rise in 2023, and the number that we got from Statistics Canada was 4,410. So these people have been coming for more than 10 years as well, and mostly coming from Mexico, Jamaica, and the Philippines. As we said before, to hire a temporary foreign worker, you need to get a closed work permit. And in order to get a closed work permit, you need to apply for a labor market impact assessment, which is a study in which this Employment Social Development Canada decides that there is nobody in the community available or willing to do this job. We know that there is a cost associated with this. I believe the cost is around 1,000 Canadian dollars per person to fill one position. And these fees are used to justify the closed work permits. And unfortunately, we know that there is an illegal market for LMIAs, for labor market impact assessment, when one of these documents can cost between 10,000 Canadian dollars and 30,000 Canadian dollars. Whenever you get your work permit, there are two ways or two types of work permit. The first one is the open work permit, which allows you to work for any employer in Canada. Au contraire, the closed work permit only allows you to work in one job and for your designated employer. With an open work permit, you have the ability to leave and change jobs. In the case of the closed work permit, if you're fired or just dismissed by any chance, you cannot work for any other employer. So you are legal in Canada, you have a status in Canada, but you cannot work. Therefore, how are you going to support yourself? The closed work permit, as we mentioned, requires an LMIA, while the open work permit does not. And it's usually, the closed work permit is usually for temporary foreign workers. And here is when I raise the question. As we can see, closed work permit ties the worker with the employer. The workers depend 100% on the employer. So Is it possible to have a respectful workplace environment when you depend 100% on the employer? Is it possible to have a respectful workplace environment with a closed work permit? We'll find this. So some issues that the temporary foreign workers face here in Canada and that ties them to their employer is the fact that the employer buys the plane tickets, so they can be threatened to go back home at any time. The employers provide the housing, meaning that the employer can control who goes in and out, establish some curfews. Also, they deduct some money from their paychecks, and it's usually $100 per bed in a room share with 3 other people and a house share with 9 other folks. So imagine the profit that the company is making out of the temporary foreign workers. We have seen cases in which the employer charged them between $5 and $10 per paycheck. That means per week for internet in a house overcrowded. That makes around $400 per month when the most expensive internet plan for any company, it's no more than $200. So we can say that employers making profit out of the workers. As we mentioned before, they depend 100% on the employer to buy groceries, for taxes, for healthcare. The employers can charge them to take them to the grocery shop to do groceries. The employer decides who goes and doesn't go to the hospital if they are feeling sick. So most of the workers that we have talked to, they say, oh, I started feeling sick, I had nausea, and the answer from my company was, go take a Tylenol and we will see later on. So unfortunately, this is an abusive situation. And if we sum this with some curfews, the harassment and the unsafe conditions, that actually doesn't make any sense for the workers to keep there. This is leading to abusive situations that are prohibited by IRCC and Service Canada. And even the worker can complain to the Service Canada tip line. Unfortunately, this is not always 100% effective because most of the workers do not speak the language. I know that Service Canada tip line has interpreters in every language, but they are not available all the time. Also, we have acknowledged that whenever a temporary foreign worker complain about the housing or the overcrowded situation of the house, Service Canada give notice to the employer so they can fix the house before. That is why most of the workers we work with, they do not trust Service Canada tip line. And that is really sad because that is one of the ways that the government give you or give us as temporary foreign workers to report abusive situations. And what is an abusive situation? An abusive situation, this is I copy paste this directly from the IRCC website. And it says that it's any behavior that scares, controls, or isolates you. The abuse can be physical, sexual, financial, or mental. And this is a list of the things that IRCC considers abuse. Physical harm, of course, forcing you to work in a way that is unsafe or puts your health at risk. Example, they don't give you goggles if you work in a fish plant sector, or they don't give you gloves. For this, we have seen cases in which the worker got burned by chemicals, and it was because it wasn't in a safe condition. Also, the unsanitary living conditions in an employer-provided housing. We have been talking about this. 10 people sharing one bathroom, 10 people sharing one stove, one living room. It's an overcrowded and it's an unsanitary living conditions. Definitely, you cannot live with 3 or more people in one room. Of course, sexual touching, sexual harassment, making unwanted sexual comments to you. controlling where you can go or who can visit you. The employer has the right to separate their work life from the private life. Okay, most of the contracts that they have, the leasing contract that we have seen at the Madu Center, they have one clause where they cannot come after 10 p.m. So that's a curfew. Why does the employer has to know where I was on a Saturday, or if I can buy alcohol or not after a long day? I have the right to have a beer at my home. So I have the right to separate my private life from my work life. Also stealing from you, stopping from seeing your friends or co-workers, taking some or all the money you are paid, threats, insults, intimidation, and I can consider here the threat of being sent back to your country, right? Forcing you to commit fraud and third-party charges fee for a job or making promises that aren't real, especially related to permanent residence status. And I would like to do an exercise with all of you over here. I would like you to open the chat and identify over here what are the abusive situations that you guys can see here in this message. Let's have like 5 minutes to do this exercise and see what you guys think.
So you guys, the audience doesn't have access to chat, but what they can do is submit their answers through the Q&A function. Perfect. And we can watch them come in there.
Amazing. That actually works. I want to hear what they think about this message.
Yeah, and we'll read them aloud as they come in.
Okay. So this is a message from, if you hear this, it's not rumors. If the amount of lobster does not increase soon, we will be sending 25 temporary foreign workers back to Mexico. When we do decide this, there will be a 2-week notice to the individual that will be going home. I am asking everyone now, are there any volunteers that wants to go home? If not, we will decide when, if the time comes, who will be sent home. To choose these 25 people, we will be looking at punctuality, not being productive at work, missing work unnecessarily, refusing to change department or refusing other job other than your regular job, giving trouble at houses, not cleaning house good, etc.
So we've got a couple of answers coming in. The first was the threat of sending workers back to Mexico.
Perfect.
Someone said financial extortion. There's sort of a work for free or else thing here. Threats to be sent home. The threat that if production doesn't increase, they'll be sent home. The threat of if you don't step up to volunteer, there will be punishment. Emotional and financial blackmail, controlling and threatening. We've got a lot of responses coming in now. Intimidation, yeah, pressure to volunteer. Someone has asked a very good question, which is, why is this sent over text or messenger? Maybe you can speak about that a little bit. That's not the way most of us are used to receiving important communications about our jobs.
Yeah, exactly.
Pitting employees against each other. And yeah, going against the agreement where the employer is supposed to give work to the workers during the work period. So maybe before you dive into everything else, do you want to say something about this being over text or messenger? I think that's an interesting question.
Yeah, unfortunately, most of the workers, they do not speak English, okay? And the way for them to communicate with the employer was through either WhatsApp or Facebook Messenger. In that way, they can copy paste and then translate that into their own languages. This was well, actually all of them speak Spanish. As you can see, they were being sent back to Mexico. It's a Spanish speaking country, as most of you may know. And yeah, that was the reason this happened, right? And one of the workers actually screenshot that and send that to us so we can help him or her at that moment with her open work permit for vulnerable worker application, which is something I'm going to explain later on. But yeah, unfortunately, this is our daily bread with fish plant here in New Brunswick. Most of the workers depend on the amount of lobster or fish or whatever the companies are related to make a living. And if they don't get hours, they cannot make any money, unfortunately. And if they don't make any money, they cannot send money back to their country. Um, they believe that most of the most of the workers that come here, they are promised at least or an average of 40 hours per week. Sometimes there is good seasons, but after August or September, the season start decreasing, the amount of lobsters start decreasing, and they are not giving any hours. Some of them can apply for employment insurance depending on the hour they have made, most of them not, but they are still being charged. They are still being charged for transportation. They are still being charged for internet. So all of this leads to mental health issues, right?
Christian, just before you move on to that stuff, we just had a
Sure.
couple more things come through in the
Go ahead.
QA, if you don't
I'm
mind.
going back to the first one.
So someone mentioned like the impacts of all of this on families. Someone brought up that it's really a problem that employers are not communicating with employees in a language that they speak and can easily understand.
Mhm.
There's people asking, what it's a problem if it's not clear what productive at work means. How are you supposed to meet a standard if it means whatever the employer wants it to mean? And people are talking about how uh, this could easily be a situation where people are used to accepting harassment and threats, and it could become a precarious situation for everybody involved.
Uh, I will start answering by the last question. And why people are enduring this harassment situation, this abuse situation, is because they have no other choice, right? Most of the folks that come to here, they have to pay recruiters in their own country to get the link to come to Canada. They pay the recruiter charges them a fee. They may not have that money and they go on loans or they ask money borrow. So they must come here, get money to first send it to the country and pay the loans. Changing jobs or complaining is not a chance for them. They don't stand a chance for them. The other thing is why do they are not being taught on their language? This is something interesting. When we had this case at the Model Center, this is from a French-speaking area here in New Brunswick, and the person actually said, "Be be glad that we are at least speaking English. Otherwise, it will be French. So don't expect us to speak Spanish." Okay, so it's quite complicated for most of the worker because most of them actually they do not speak English. 90% of them they do not speak French, and they can only understand that in their language. That's why they have this WhatsApp group or Facebook Messenger group, so they can take screenshots and send them to people that actually can translate for that. And I'm sorry, what was the other question?
Well, I think that was everything. People were just saying that it makes sense that people accept harassment and abuse if this is the way everything is working together.
Right. Yeah, unfortunately, that is how it is at this point. And of course, this leads to all these situations leads to mental health issues. There is a stress of crowding, people sharing a house with 9 more people. There is definitely a lack of privacy. It leads to inability to sleep well. They have to wake up early to get a chance to shower, to cook, to do their own laundry. There is no space for storage and becomes almost impossible to keep spaces clean, especially with the very limited time they have, right? Of course, you're in a different country, you're going to miss your family. And with message like that one that we just seen, you are living in fear. You're living in constant intimidation, knowing that at any time you can be sent back to your country, lose all the money that you have invested, because for these people, this is an investment having to come to Canada and work. This is an investment. And there is also the stress of needing to send money home, the remittances. Most of these folks, these family folks, rely on the money these workers are sending back to the country. And of course, there's always a racism at work and in the community they live in. In 2023, 4 New Brunswick companies were fined for breaking migrant workers' rules. After this, they were not able to hire any new temporary foreign workers until they paid the debt. This number raised to 5 in 2024. And one of them actually was fined for over $300,000. There's a lawsuit against this company initiated by 2 temporary foreign workers with the help of Migrant Workers Alliance for Change. There's another organization that we work closely with. But now we ask, when you as a temporary foreign worker find yourself in this kind of abusive situation, what you can do? Is there any solution? Is there any solution? And what the government of Canada gives us is the open work permit for vulnerable workers. And they say that if you're being abused or risk of being abused in a relationship to your job in Canada, you may be eligible for an open work permit for vulnerable workers. However, this open work permit for vulnerable workers has an expire date. It's only for 1 year, and that cannot be renewed. So in the end, we have to go back to a closed work permit with an LMIA. This is a vicious circle, right? And we ask if the open work permit for vulnerable workers is a real solution. As we said before, it's only a temporary measure. It only lasts 1 year. It's extremely hard to submit the application. The first time I submitted an application with the Madu Center for a worker, it took me 3 weeks. And I do speak English, I understand a little bit of French, and I know how to submit this kind of applications, but it was extremely difficult. Now I have more experience, but imagine somebody that actually doesn't speak English or don't have a computer. Oh, one of the other things that you must have a laptop. You cannot submit this on your phone or your tablet. At the end of the 1 year, you need again another closed work permit with an LMIA. And that is why some workers actually they don't leave the dangerous workplace because of language skills. They don't know how to speak English. They don't know how to speak French. If they don't know how to speak the language, how are they going to be able to find another job? At least in this abusive workplace, they do have a housing. If they don't have any money because they couldn't meet ends, having a job, how are they going to change to another house, right? They also need transportation. In Canada, especially here in New Brunswick, we do not have reliable public transportation. They need to get a car. And it's impossible for somebody that makes minimum wage and working less than 30 hours a week to do that. So what we need in the end, we need to work in a respectful environment as a temporary foreign worker. What we need is the ability of changing jobs if we actually face some struggles. We need to have the right to complain without getting any repercussions from our employer. We have the right to work and separate our private life from our workplace. Unfortunately, and as the UN Special Rapporteur said during his visit last year, actually he came to New Brunswick, we had a meeting with him in Moncton, and he mentioned that the temporary foreign working program served as a breeding ground for contemporary form of slavery. Therefore, and I answered this question, the question that we made at the beginning of this of this presentation. We cannot have a respectful workplace environment with a closed work permit because the program is designed to exploit temporary foreign workers. We do not need more disposable workers. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Christian. That was very informative. We have a handful of questions coming through the Q&A. Audience, keep them coming. We have about 20 minutes to chat with Christian. I just want to get us started with a couple of quick things that jumped out at me from your talk. One was, you talked about this new open work permit sort of conversion for people on closed work permits who are being abused or are at risk of being abused. But from what you've been describing in the setup of closed work permits, aren't almost all people on closed work permits at risk of being abused? Do you have any idea how the government is, distinguishing between who's at risk enough to be eligible for the temporary open work permit and who isn't?
Yeah, actually, for that, you have to submit an application. The one that's you have to fill the IMM 5710 on the IRCC website. You have to explain why are you at risk of abuse or in an abusive relationship in your workplace. Unfortunately, you cannot submit videos, you cannot submit audios. Everything has to be with screenshots or photograph, right? Over the 2 years, on the 2 years that I've been working at the Madu Center, we have submitted over 40 open work permits for vulnerable workers, most of them successful. And the reasons why they are successful is because we have messages like the one I just showed, right? When the employer shows the real personality and shows the abusive situation, and we have evidence of that, right?
Right. Yeah, it's kind of unbelievable that they would just say that in writing out in the open. I was an employment lawyer before coming to this work, and seeing something in writing like that from an employer or from a boss, you just think this is such strong evidence that illegal and abusive things are happening. But it sounds like in this context, they're just counting on there not being anything that people can do about it. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. Unfortunately, this has to do a lot with the background of the people that is coming to Canada as temporary foreign workers. As I mentioned, they do not speak the language, not English, no French. So even though if they apply for an open work permit for vulnerable workers and got it granted for 1 year, it will be extremely difficult for them to reinsert themselves in the Canadian society. First, because of the language. Second, transportation, housing, and all the issues they are facing, right?
Right.
It's really complicated. We had one case of two ladies that applied for the open work permit. They got it granted, but they didn't leave the workplace because they didn't know what to do.
Right. 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 So the problem isn't even solved at that point necessarily.
Exactly.
The one other thing I wanted to ask you about before we get to the audience questions is what tools and systems that are available to other employees in Canada are available to temporary foreign workers? Like if you're just a Canadian citizen who's an employee here, we have access to the courts, we have access to, the New Brunswick Human Rights Commission. Do temporary foreign workers also have access to those things, and is that helpful at all?
Actually, they do have access. We have present some claims for works in New Brunswick, Employment Standards, Human Rights Commission, but that is through the Madu Center. When you are on your own and you don't know if there is a Madu Center or a Migrant Workers Alliance for Change or a MAGMA or whatever institution, you don't know what to do.
Right.
Especially if you don't know the language or you don't know anybody who actually understand how the process or the application is.
Right. Right. Yep, that absolutely makes sense. So we had a question here from someone in the audience. They said, "Great presentation, Christian.
Thank you.
Could you talk a bit more about the situation where employers are obligated to provide health insurance for workers? If employees have private coverage, like not using public resources, is it an issue about reaching healthcare facilities because they're in rural areas? So how are temporary foreign workers doing with access to healthcare, both in terms of, insurance coverage and also being able to get places?
Okay, so New Brunswick Medicare Act states that to for applying to Medicare, you have to get at least 1 year of temporary residence here in Canada, in New Brunswick, I'm sorry. So if you're a student, you can get it if your program is over 1 year. If you're a worker, if your work permit is for 1 year or more. Most of these temporary foreign workers, they come on seasonal basis. So they do not qualify for medical, for provincial Medicaid coverage. So the employer is obligated to have a co-one insurance. So that's a private insurance thing. Main problem is that with the cases that we had, is the employer that fills the claim for the worker, because there is nobody else that can actually do it for them, right? And most of the time is pay first and we will reimburse you later on. Imagine having to pay $900 or $1,000 out of your pocket and get reimbursed in 2 or 3 more weeks. So that is why most of the workers decide not to use the co-one insurance. Some other thing is that in rural areas, as you just said, the workers are far away from hospitals or clinics or anything. So if by any chance they have an emergency, who's the one that is supposed to bring them to the hospital? It's the employer. And as we see during my experience, the employer does not have one person that works as a truck driver or a car driver or a driver to bring this person to the hospital. So they have to wait until somebody actually is going to that area so they can be so they can receive medical attention.
Right, right. So one of our questions in here is asking, are there any lawyers available to assist temporary foreign workers if needed, for example, with, permits or other concerns?
Okay, so for permits to, when you mean for permits, you mean to come to Canada? Unfortunately, we do not assist foreign workers coming to Canada. We assist them while they're in Canada.
Mm.
Our organization has one staff lawyer, 2 case workers, but I'm pretty sure there are other organizations around New Brunswick, like Migrant Workers Alliance for Change. I see No One is Illegal. They actually changed their name in Nova Scotia. And also the settlement agencies, they actually refer them to us. So even though we do not have a big team, we try to always do our best to help these workers, and everything is for free.
While we're on this topic, could you say a little bit more broadly about what Madhu Varma does? And if there's any projects that you're working on right now, you could share them with everyone.
So at this moment, I know that we are launching one program that is it's a sanctuary network for health. It's like a health coalition. I cannot give more details about it because it's still doing baby steps. But regarding our job at the Madhu Center, I can state that almost 80% of our clients are temporary foreign workers applying for an open work permit for vulnerable workers. We also have cases for temporary people victim of domestic violence, human trafficking, and I believe also one kind of student that was actually losing their status because one problem. But most of our work concentrates with open work permit for vulnerable workers.
Okay, got it. Another question here. Are there any inspections required for workplaces or accommodation provided to temporary foreign workers in order for the employer to be allowed to hire them?
Actually, no, there's no standards. There is no standard for accommodation or housing. And unfortunately, last year in the rural area of one of the rural areas of northern New Brunswick, some workers reported the overcrowding situation on the housing conditions, right? There were like 15 people living in one house, and unfortunately, Service Canada tip um, the employer, so they knew when the inspection was. So this creates discomfort, distrust. Workers do not trust Canada Service Canada tip line anymore because of this.
So when they call Service Canada and then Service Canada talks to the employer, is the idea that the way it should work is that Service Canada tells the employer that there's an issue with the housing. They hope the employer fixes the housing and it doesn't become a problem again. But what's
Yeah,
happening in practice is they clean up just for the inspection and then everything goes back to normal. Is that what's happening?
I would like to say that, but the correct way of saying it would be they make the workers clean that
Mm,
and then pass inspection.
okay. Okay. I
Yeah.
understand. Understood.
Unfortunately, this is what is happening in our province, and that's something that we cannot stand for.
Sure. Um, so first of all, I want to say we've got a lot of comments that have come through saying this was a great presentation.
Thank you.
People really expressing that the conditions are horrifying, and that this sort of doesn't this people are very supportive of what you're talking about.
Thank you.
Um, Another question, and they say coming from a place of ignorance, but I think it's a reasonable question. Do employers promise language training for employees before they come? Like, is that
No, they
something
not.
they're offering? No.
No,
So
they not.
everyone knows that it'll
Mhm.
be hard to communicate.
Yeah, actually, when they are in Mexico, in most of the contracts they sign while they're in Mexico, it says no English or French proficiency needed.
Mm,
So that states on the contract.
okay. Okay. Sorry, I'm looking through our many comments that are here.
Yeah, go ahead.
Here's one. So is there something that people can do outside of those workplaces to help temporary foreign workers, or can we only help by pressuring government to change laws that allow employers to get away with these kinds of threats?
There's a lot of way that you can help. Just give them a ride whenever they need groceries, for example.
Mm,
They will be saving $6 that they actually need to send that money to their country. There is a lot of things that we can do, of course, on the political side. We can pressure the government to end and abolish closed work permit, but I believe that's not part of the agenda right now.
sure. Is there anyone who's organizing things like rides for temporary foreign workers? Like, is that something people can easily get involved with?
Yeah, actually, there is Migrant Workers Alliance for Change. They always organize a rally. Last year, that was on September. I don't know if they're doing this again, but last year it was important for us to acknowledge that there were two female workers from Mexico that actually were being harassed, and another 15 workers that didn't come back this year because they were on the media expressing this.
Okay. Okay. So we did put a link to the Madhu Verma Center in chat, and we'll also pull a link for the Migrant Alliance for Change so that those
Yeah.
links will be available to
I
everybody.
also would like to share with you guys, I don't know if everybody see the message I just sent.
Here,
Last, yeah,
I'll
it's a
post it in
link.
the chat for everybody.
Yeah, it's a link. And actually, this year, the Madhu Center launched a documentary. It's called Chaos and Control, where migrant workers from New Brunswick tell their story. So I invite every one of you to check this and see how hard the conditions migrant workers in our province are living.
Okay, great. We've shared that, so that video is available to everybody in the chat, and I just saw the Migrant Workers Alliance link go up as well.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
I have a couple more questions if you don't mind. I think we have
Yeah.
about 10 minutes left.
Mhm.
So one that's come through says, Hello, I work for a union. In some nursing homes, temporary foreign workers are unionized and therefore have some more protection. However, what we've noticed is employers are still threatening temporary foreign workers and telling them not to get involved in the union or they could be fired or forced to return to their country. We're working really hard to communicate that this is not true and they have a collective agreement protecting them. They can file grievances, etc. It's been successful in some cases, but unfortunately, some temporary foreign workers are still really afraid. Do you have any advice on how we could proceed to build trust there? We also understand that in some countries, unions are illegal and that this is complicated for everybody. Thank you so much for your help.
Yeah, well, in Canada, unions are not illegal. First of all, you can unionize
Yes.
anytime. So the main problem is the background situation of every temporary foreign worker. We have to do on a case by case basis. We had one case at the Madu Center of a nurse, and unfortunately, she got dismissed. But I'm sorry, she was facing abusive situation, but she didn't want to quit because a nursing job actually gives her permanent residence. So it's really, really complicated when permanent resident things are involved, because most of the workers decide to endure this abusive situation, not unionize, not complain, just because they have been promised permanent residence and actually they know that they can do it with this kind of job. It's kind of different with the fish plant workers where they know that they cannot have permanent residence in the future, that's a path to nowhere. um, Also, for the fish plant workers to unionize, it's quite complicated because of they do not speak the language, they don't trust the people in the company. So to create a union, you must trust the one that is actually gathering all the information and all the people. Mhm.
Yeah, that makes sense. Um, have you seen workers being retaliated against um, by even other workers after a call has been made to Service Canada?
Yeah, unfortunately, that's the case. Most of the workers, um, they face retaliation from their own teammates, right? And after that, there is no other pathway or anything else than applying for an open work permit for vulnerable workers, because the harassment doesn't only come from the workplace but from their own teammates. But yeah, that I've seen a couple of cases like that.
Um, one more question from the audience. Would you say that the temporary foreign worker program management is part of the problem for issues? Like that people are, management or the administration is turning a blind eye to these problems?
Mm, I wouldn't I mean I wouldn't say I say that. The special rapporteur from the United Nations said that this is a breeding ground for contemporary form of slavery.
Right.
The program is designed to exploit foreign workers. That I have no doubt about that. So the problem is that the program does not work. That doesn't give you the ability that anybody should have of living a dangerous workplace.
Mhm.
Imagine that you'll have to be tied to one worker because of a paper, to one employer, sorry, because of a paper. That's slavery.
Right. Absolutely. So if anyone else has further questions from Christian, you're welcome to get them in now. Um, yeah, there's a lot of support for what you guys are doing in chat. There's a lot of sympathy about
Thank you
how
very
hard it
much.
is to make complaints and do organizing and all of that, particularly if you may or may not have a college or university education, or there's language issues. There's so much power imbalance. Um, yeah, it looks like that might be the end of our audience questions. So I guess in that case, and unless you have any last remarks on this, Christian, anything that you want to direct people to, anything you recommend that they read, um, places that they can lend support. Do you want to suggest any of that?
Yeah, sure. If you know any temporary foreign worker that is facing a visa situation, please let them know about the Madu Burma Migrant Justice Center. We're here to help. Also, Migrant Workers Alliance for Change, and just refer them to any settlement agency here in New Brunswick, and we will be able to assist them with their rights. Thank you very much.
Amazing. Thank you so much for being here and for taking us through all of this. This was excellent. I learned a lot about this. With that, I think we will take a few minutes break before we go on to our next session, which will start at 2 o'clock or just a couple of minutes before. We're going to reconvene with a discussion panel in which a group of workplace investigators will talk about trends they're seeing in workplace harassment investigations. So if you ever wanted to know more about how investigations work, be sure to join us then. And thank you once again for joining us and all of your work, Christian.
Thank you very much. Have a lovely day, guys.
We'll see you very soon.